is presenting this evening's conversation. She's the medical director for Pediatric Mental Health at Dell Children's Medical Center. And she's just been such a great partner to us. We've been doing so much more work there at Dell Children's because of her support and affirmation of the work that we're doing. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Dr. Koli.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Karen. It is such a pleasure to be here this evening, and I'm so grateful for all of the work that you and your amazing team at NAMI do to help our children, families, and community. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, originally from Honolulu, Hawaii, and I'm fairly new to Austin. I've been here for about a year and a half. I'm very honored and grateful to work with this amazing team at Dell Children's of psychologists, psychiatrists, trainees, and just some wonderful people in the hospital. Part of my role there is as the medical director of Pediatric Mental Health, where I help to oversee all of our inpatient, outpatient services, and a little bit of everything in between. So today I'm really excited to be here and to talk just about some practical ways of how we can all navigate through this challenging time together, and really look for some ways that we can help our kids and our families who are feeling a little bit uncertain.
Well, and I love the fact that before we got started that you had to wrangle your own kids and quiet them down as we were getting started. And so I think one of the wonderful gifts is not only do you bring all of this expertise, this medical expertise, but you're also going to, I think, bring us this evening just some real solid advice that comes from just being a mom and knowing what it is to navigate this really challenging time as you're working and with kids and all of that. So let's go ahead and get started. I think one of the things that we wanted to tell you is that we will have some time for questions, hopefully at the end. And so you can submit these questions at any time, just clicking on if you look below at the bottom, there's a Q&A section there, and that's where you can drop any questions that you might have. But before we get started with the questions, we thought we'd ask you a quick question. So we're going to just do a very quick poll. And so we were curious of all the folks that are online. We've got 117 folks that are with us this evening. We wanted you to tell us a little bit about the ages of your kids at home, because we thought that might help Dr. Koli in terms of sort of focusing some of the responses to her questions based on how old your kids are. So if you would just join us in submitting the ages that and you can pick multiple of them. What are the ages of your kids at home? So tell us a little bit about the kiddos you've got at home, and then we'll get started. Okay, so hopefully you all got a chance to submit that, and if I think somebody mentioned that they don't have any kids, and that's okay too. We just thought that would give us a little bit. Oh, there we go. And now we all know. Thanks for sharing that, Christina. Okay, so it looks like the bulk of our kids are coming from that 6 to 10 age group, but then they're kind of spread out. So we have a pretty good mix of different ages. All right, thank you. And I apologize, I didn't actually introduce Christina at the beginning, but a big thanks to Christina, who's sort of navigating all the technology for us tonight. We wouldn't be able to do this nearly as well as we do without her. So thank you, Christina. She's also going to be monitoring all of the questions that are coming through as well. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Basically, what we did was we crafted some questions already for you, Dr. Koli, from just some of the parents that we've been hearing from already. So we're just going to get started with those questions. And we're going to go ahead and pop them up on a slide as well, so that you can look back on them as well as everyone else. So the first thing that we thought we'd talk a little bit about is that you know, most of us are trying not to watch the news with our kids, but they still hear a lot, and we know that they're fearful of what's happening. How do we address their fears?
No, that's a great question. There is so much out there right now in terms of news and social media, and there's a lot of good information and there's a lot of misinformation. I think the first thing that we can do is just be calm. You know, kids are oftentimes going to get their cue from us. And so if we can maintain a calm presence, and if we can be in a place where we can reassure them, that's where we're really going to be able to help them most effectively. I think one of the other things that can be really helpful is to help kids label their feelings. There's no such thing as a bad feeling. It's just about understanding what those feelings are and what that feels like for them. So in just acknowledging that, there are things that are in our control and there's things that are not in our control. And right now, oftentimes what makes us feel anxious is the things that feel unpredictable. So I think, going from just the first thing is just being calm and just making sure that kids, when they want to talk, they have a space in which to do that.
I think that that's great because so often I think that even we as adults are a little fearful of how we feel. I think this is all new for all of us. I think as a parent, I'm used to feeling like I'm in control, and I don't necessarily feel that way. And so I would say that that's true for parents as well, that we need to encourage parents as well to sort of embrace the fact that we're all feeling this way and that we all feel a little stressed and anxious, and being able to name it can be really powerful. Otherwise, I feel like it's kind of one of those things that sort of just sits there and gets a little overwhelming because we haven't named it, but it's still there. So I love that notion of really helping ourselves and our kids name what those fears are. Okay, so our next question. So lots of advice tells us that we should keep things as normal as possible. But what does this mean for kids? And what would you say is most important in relation to that?
So we hear that routines are so important for kids. Routines and schedules. Routines oftentimes offer a sense of comfort because it feels like things are the same. And right now, especially with kids not being in school, things can feel even more overwhelming. Not having that structure of school to go to. School really provides a nice structure and routine for our lives. And not having that there in that traditional sense can feel a little bit disconcerting, and oftentimes can lead to higher, more feelings of anxiety and just feeling more uncertain. So keeping things routine, meaning, having the same bedtime and waking up at the same time, having meals as a family, making sure that kids get enough time outside whenever possible. Just trying to keep things feeling as normal as possible so that when things feel so uncertain and chaotic in our world, kids feel like they have something that they can turn to that feels like life as usual.
Okay. Would you say that that's important for us as parents as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all enjoy kind of going on vacation and sort of having all those routines kind of go to the wayside and just sort of be in that spot. But, it's important to be able to get into that regular routine every day. This quarantine and social distancing has been going on for a few weeks now. And the more time that goes on where things feel a little bit untethered, that oftentimes leads to a lot of different emotions and feelings. So keeping things as regular and routine as possible really helps not just kids, but it helps us.
Yeah, I think so. I know for me as well that I've noticed, we're working remotely as lots of people are these days, and how I just feel like I feel better when I get up in the morning and I actually still get dressed and come down to my new office because it is, I think it's sort of like you said, like a day or two of that is something, but then the ongoing of feeling like you're not in any kind of rhythm can be really disorienting. So, but I would also say, is it okay for on occasion then to just really take advantage of the fact that you're all home and do something completely different and say, hey, you're going to have pajama day today? Is that okay too?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the things about this place that we're in right now, it's this opportunity for us to be together as families and to really take advantage. I mean, in the midst of such a chaotic time, what a wonderful opportunity to come together as a family and to enjoy one another. And to have some times where we really can have things like a pajama day or a movie day, and really be able to connect with our kids in a way that we're not always able to with how busy and chaotic life is in general. With parents working, kids going to school, sometimes I know for myself, I feel like there's just a 2-hour window of time after work and school, and you're rushing to do dinner and bath time and bedtime. Here we are in this place where we sometimes have a little bit more time and a little bit more unstructured time where we can really have fun and be creative and enjoy one another.
I know it's been really kind of nice to see just in my neighborhood how many more families I'm seeing walking around, riding their bikes, out doing all kinds of, playing with bubbles or all kinds of things. And so I think that that's a great point is I would imagine some of this is also about us taking advantage of some of the upsides of what's going on. And one of those is, as you pointed out, this opportunity to spend some time together that ordinarily we don't have. So thank you. Okay, so next question. Okay, so, and I hear this quite a bit. So thinking about those kids who maybe have always been a little bit anxious. So my kid has always been an anxious kid, but the breaks in routine and negative news are making this anxiety even harder to manage. What can parents do to help with that?
It's a really good question. And I think that this sort of COVID pandemic has really we've seen an increase in anxiety across the board for those individuals who may be a little more predisposed to anxiety and for those individuals who may not be. So for a child who already has a little bit of anxiety and is a little bit on the anxious side, this can really throw things for a loop. And so I think the first thing is just acknowledging that they're feeling out of sorts. And knowing that anxiety can manifest in so many different ways. For younger kids, you may see more tantrums, more acting out behaviors. For teens and older kids, we may see them a little bit more withdrawn, maybe a little bit more tearful, not eating and drinking as well. So part of it, I think, is first I loved what you said before, Karen, is just labeling it, acknowledging that this is this feeling that we're noticing and that we're feeling. The other thing that I think is that if we can join in it together in a sense of just validating that this is a time where many people feel anxious and that feeling of anxiety is not going to last forever. No matter how challenging a feeling is, it's not going to last forever. So remembering that even in that face of anxiety, there's things that we can do to help. Oftentimes when our kids feel out of sorts, we feel out of sorts as parents. And so one of the most important things is just being kind to ourselves and giving ourselves grace in terms of just saying that this is hard, being home all the time and maybe homeschooling and having kids that feel out of sorts can be really challenging. So if we can be kind to ourselves and practice gratitude and be present with our kids, we're going to be much more in tune with what's going on for them.
Oh, I really love what you just said. It's so interesting. I think I mentioned to you, I was sitting on a panel before this webinar. I was actually on another mental health panel, and we talked quite a bit about this notion of grace. So I think it's so interesting that you would mention it as well, that we talked about this notion of extending that grace, not just to others, but also to ourselves. And how important that is right now at this time, that so often we're hardest on ourselves than anyone else is. So I feel like I'm hearing a lot of that from parents that I know, really being hard on themselves because feeling like they're failing. I'm not good at this. I'm having to teach my kid at home and then also trying to work, and I feel overwhelmed and I feel like I'm just failing. And how important it is to, again, extend that grace to ourselves and say, we are all doing the best that we can. And how important that is to just what you mentioned, being kind and gentle to ourselves. And I have to imagine that that's got to be really powerful when you share that kind of message with your child, to be able to say that I'm feeling that way too. And we need to be kind and gentle to ourselves and others, and how powerful that could really be in this time. So I wonder if you have any thoughts around things like, I hear a lot of folks talking about teaching and doing meditative exercises or breathing exercises with kids. And I wonder what your thoughts were about that as well, thinking about anxiety.
Absolutely. I think it's such a wonderful tool. And it's one that I practice with my patients, with myself, with my own kids. That ability to just breathe, to remember that our breath is constant. Really practicing deep breathing and mindfulness and meditation. Nowadays there's so many great apps with which to do that. There's things like Headspace and Calm and Virtual Hope Box. There's a number of them that are out there. And that oftentimes I think kids really enjoy, because it's something that's on a device that oftentimes makes it a little bit more palatable, a little bit more fun. But however we do it, just taking that moment to do some deep breathing, even just a minute or two, can oftentimes help us to reset, especially in those moments of higher anxiety and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And if any of you missed that, I bet Christina can probably drop that into the chat in terms of just sharing again some of those resources that you mentioned: Calm, Headspace, Insight Timer. There's a number of apps that are available. I like Insight Timer a lot because they have so many free extra breathing exercises and meditations that are no cost. There's also some great videos if you're not familiar with some of these breathing techniques, like box breathing and alternate nostril breathing, but you can just Google those and there's some great videos that will show up that will show you how to do them. And so I have discovered even for myself how helpful that can be, to just remember to stop, like you said, even sometimes for a minute or two, to just breathe. Okay, well, let's move on to the next question. Christina may be writing. There we go. Okay. Oh, well, we talked about a couple of these, but other things that, simple things that we can do to help our kids, but also I think ourselves, alleviate some of that stress.
So a couple of other things that I would add are play. One of the best things that we can do with our kids is just play with them. Be silly, have fun, be creative. Play is a natural stress reliever. And we think about play oftentimes with our younger kids, but there's other ways that we play as kids get older, whether it's board games or, different things that we can do. So playing is huge. I think the other one is exercise and physical movement. Just getting outside, even if it's for a walk. I think, like you said, Karen, there's so many families going out for walks now in the evening that wasn't really happening as much before. But going for walks, practicing good social distancing while we're doing that, but making sure that we're getting outside, even just feeling the sun and feeling the breeze. Being out. We have such beautiful places in Austin, and so just being able to be outside for a little bit can be really helpful. And then, if we are indoors and outside, a walk in a neighborhood is not really an option, some physical movement inside. So that could look like yoga. That could, look like, even for younger kids, yoga can be really great. There's Cosmic Kids Yoga. That's really fun for younger kids. And, different ones as kids get older. Even running around the house and playing a game of tag in the house. Sometimes that can not only alleviate stress, but when you see kids really wound up, it just lets out this energy, and those natural endorphins that rise with exercise can be a wonderful stress reliever.
Yeah, I love that. I've been hearing about a lot of families that are having dance parties these days, which I think is really fun, of just, because then I think it gives this great opportunity for parents to introduce some of their own music. But everybody just pushes furniture out of the way and then just has fun dancing and singing along to the music. And so that can be, I think, another great way to get families together. So, okay. So let's move on to the next question. So we saw that there were some folks that had some teens. So we know that for teens, peer relationships are so important. I see my teens struggling with being isolated and at the same time not wanting to participate in family things like movie or game night the way my younger ones do. You kind of alluded to that earlier when you were talking to teens, that they might become withdrawn. So any suggestions or tips on helping teens during this time?
I think acknowledging that this is hard. That social and peer relationships are really the mainstay of being an adolescent, and taking our adolescents out of that environment in which they feel the most comfortable and they feel that's the most meaningful for them at that stage of their life. This is really hard. And we can do hard things and we can do them together. I think encouraging kids to be able to still stay in touch with their friends and using things like FaceTime and texting and calling, things from an educational standpoint, virtual classrooms and education modules have been really helpful. And I think a lot of what we're all doing now, we're adapting to all of webinars and, virtual ways of getting together. And so trying to encourage that and balance it. And then also just allowing our teens to feel disappointed. I've heard so many stories over these past few months of parents of seniors in high school. And, these are all of these milestones that they're looking at, homecoming and prom and graduation, and everything just feels like all of those experiences that they've been looking forward to feel like they've been taken away. And so to acknowledge that this is disappointing, and the best and safest thing that we can do right now is to stay home and socially distance, and that we have a true opportunity here to really flatten the curve and to change the trajectory so that we are not in the same place that some of the other big cities in our country are.
So there was a question sort of related to that. I would guess similarly, would you say the same in regards to advice for those of us that have college students that are also home and missing their friends and their social lives as well, navigating that? And I think there's probably some additional pieces to that as well when we talk about the fact that many of them obviously are adults. And so you also have this different kind of situation. So any other thoughts on that?
That's challenging in its own right. When we are sending our kids off to college, they have more autonomy, they're becoming young adults. And so to try to do that as they're now back home is definitely challenging. I think trying to find opportunities where they can maintain some degree of independence, however small or big that may be. But just also, acknowledging their need for space, especially if they've been off at college, they're used to having their own space and time to do things, and maybe not on that same schedule and routine that we may do things as the rest of the family. So giving them some space to be able to do that, not encouraging things to be together as a family, but not pushing. Just making sure that there is a space available if they need it, and knowing and trusting that relationship, that they will come if they need something.
So there was another question that came through. We were kind of alluding to it earlier, so I'd like to go back to this. We were talking about this notion of sort of now we're sort of providing schooling at home now. So we had a parent that asked, what advice do you have for parents that are new to all this homeschooling and with their kids? And so this particular mom says, my kids are typically great students, but with me and my husband, they don't seem to do anything other than play games online. When we try to engage them in work, they misbehave. Thoughts on that?
That's a hard one. And this is one that we are definitely all trying to navigate together here. I think it just goes from the fact that kids are used to being a little bit different at school than they are at home. So in this space of having things a little bit unstructured, it is normal and developmentally appropriate to test limits and to test boundaries. Right? It doesn't mean they're bad kids, and it doesn't mean we're bad parents. So expecting that pushing those limits is absolutely normal. And then finding ways as much as we can to make it fun, to create some sort of structure and routine around schoolwork, and to allow for frequent breaks. Just because it's hard and not in their usual environment, in their usual classroom. So trying to even kind of piecemeal so that all of that schoolwork isn't done just in one time period.
I love that. They're developmentally right on track. Okay. Okay, next question. So we talked a little bit, obviously, about some of the anxiety and stress, but on a real low level. But what are some of the signs that that parents should be looking for that they might need help beyond what they can provide?
Some stress, anxiety, some feelings of sadness and disappointment are all normal. Those are all normal reactions in the midst of what we're all experiencing as a community. Some signs that may indicate that things are a little bit beyond what we would expect in that sort of normal parameter is really kind of thinking about if that anxiety is so severe that kids are having a hard time falling asleep at night or staying asleep. If we're seeing big changes in appetite where they're not eating and drinking as normal, if we see that they're really withdrawn and really tearful, not able to function in the same way that we're used to them functioning. As a parent, I think trusting your instinct, you know your child the best. And so if you're sensing that things do not seem right and that they just seem different than they're used to being, and if that's persistent, not only for a day or two, but over several days or a couple of weeks, that may be a sign that your child may need a little bit more help.
And then in that case, well, let's go ahead and go to the next question, because the next question might be actually what I was thinking of asking. So maybe that was it. Yes. So let's say we get to that place where I love what you said though about really trusting your instinct on this, because I know at NAMI often talk about this as well, that so often I can give you a list of things, but you know your child really well. And so it's paying attention to that and not dismissing it when you're having those feelings of something doesn't feel quite right. So let's say you get to that point that you might be concerned about your child's mental health. What should you do?
You know, I think there's a number of things that you can do. I think the first thing is looking at safety. You know, are there any acute safety concerns? So one of the big things that we worry about with anxiety and depression is sometimes kids and adolescents may be at the point where they're not feeling safe, and they may have thoughts about wanting to end their own life or really being in a really tough place. And so if that is what we're noticing and seeing, then that really is an emergency. And we want to seek help immediately. And so that could be calling 911, going to the emergency room. It could be calling crisis services through Integral Care or the mobile crisis outreach team. In general, if we're just a little bit worried in terms of, hey, my child doesn't quite seem right, I'm worried that they're a little bit anxious or they may be developing some depression in the midst of this. Oftentimes the first place is really reaching out to their pediatrician. Pediatrician is oftentimes who knows your child the best. And so they can be a really good resource in terms of what do we do next and what are the right referrals and resources. I know that for NAMI has some really wonderful resources. There's a number of community mental health providers. We have a clinic over at Dell Children's. There's many clinics all throughout the community, but knowing that there is good help out there. So if you're concerned, you know, starting to make those phone calls, talking to the pediatrician first, and then starting to look for a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help get a better sense of what may be going on.
Okay, great. I want to go back to, because you mentioned Integral Care, and I'm a big fan of their helpline. So that's the 512-472-HELP number. So Integral Care, if you're not familiar with them, they are our local mental health authority, and that number, someone's answering 24/7. And if you're not in the Travis County area, all counties are connected to some local mental health authority, and most of them now have these 24/7 helplines. I know Bluebonnet Trails, which is most of the surrounding counties, also does as well. But the great thing about calling them is that they have a clinician online that then responds to your calls, and I think they're very well equipped to sort of help you navigate what the next steps are. Because I think from the perspective of parents, it's oftentimes just hard to know, am I overreacting? Is it the right next step? You know, and so I think it's oftentimes really helpful to have someone who isn't emotionally connected to your situation to be able to walk you through what should the next steps be. And then, as you mentioned, one of the things that a lot of folks don't know about Integral Care is that then they can also then send someone out to do an assessment in your own home. If it warrants it. And I think knowing that is also really comforting in the midst of everything that we're navigating right now. So Jenna just provided a number for us, and that is probably the Bluebonnet Trails number, which is the 800-841-1255. Yes, it's Bluebonnet Trails. So that's the number for Bluebonnet Trails. They are the local mental health authority in the surrounding counties. And then, so I certainly want to pitch that as also a good first start as well. Okay, let's flip over to the next one. And I feel like this next question coming up, we've alluded to it a little bit, but I thought we could cover it a little bit more. And then we've got some other questions that have come up as well. So we talked a little bit about this, but I think it's good to spend some time. You sort of alluded to how important it is. How are we feeling? So if we're feeling stressed and anxious about the situation, I think there's a couple of things. One is, how do I manage my own worries as a parent? So let's talk about that first, and then I have a follow-up question to that as well. Thoughts on that?
A little bit of what we were saying before, that it is normal to feel stressed and anxious in this situation. This is uncharted territory for all of us. And it's so important that we take care of ourselves and be incredibly gentle and give ourselves grace. And so how do we manage our own worries in this time? So unpredictable. A good friend had kind of posed some questions of, checking in terms of some quarantine questions every day, and to kind of start with some check-ins of, what am I grateful for today? What's one good thing that happened? Helping us to notice that our own anxieties and stress that may be happening, but also realizing that no feeling lasts forever. How do we try to acknowledge what's happening, and then also look at ways that we can just manage some of those worries? Other things, I think that, one of the biggest challenges right now is that we're feeling disconnected with friends, with extended family. So who am I checking in with? Who am I connecting with today? And then, we have a usual normal routine in life. So how do we let go of some of those expectations of normal? Because nothing feels normal right now. And so how do we let go of some of those expectations and be able to just go with the flow a little more? What is today going to bring, and how can we focus on today? Those other things that we talked about, that self-care, maybe getting outside, moving our bodies, getting a yoga class in, doing something that really feels like we're taking care of ourselves. So maybe taking a bath, it could be anything that could be self-care, even some mindfulness or meditation. And even if it feels like we don't have the time to do that, it's so important to really focus on that self-care, because that's going to help so much in terms of our ability to be present as parents.
Thank you. I think that was great. I want to run through what I heard you say, because I thought you made so many great points. And I thought it was interesting that I sort of felt like you started with some gratitude. I thought that was really, I think most of us don't realize it, but how much gratitude impacts us. And especially in the midst of all this, where I think sometimes with our lives turned upside down, it can be easy to not feel like there's a whole lot to be grateful for. But it's interesting. I tried to develop that practice on my own. In fact, one of the things that I recommend is, I know at our house, we've got just a little jar. It's our gratitude jar. And so we just got little, Post-it notes, and you can just write things down, and how powerful it is to write down the things that you're grateful for in that day. And sometimes it's real simple stuff, but it can be really powerful. So I love that you started with that. And then you also talked about the connection piece, which I think is so important. We've been talking a lot at NAMI about the fact that the language we're using is around social distancing, but that really what we're doing is we're physically distancing ourselves. But we need to stay socially connected, because we are social beings. And especially if you're spending your day all day long with your kids, you need that adult time as well. And so, same thing that we're encouraging for our kids, which is to spend time using technology to connect, that we sort of need to encourage ourselves to do the same, to, get a few girlfriends together and, meet them for a cup of coffee, using Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever it is, right? How important it is for us to connect as well. And then I heard you talking about self-care, which I thought was really important. I think it's so easy as parents, we are sort of in this role of constantly caring for other people, and especially our kids, that we don't recognize, but we're all familiar with that image that has been given to us about that whole, like, being on an airplane and what are you supposed to do, right? You're supposed to put that mask on yourself first. And so I love that you talked about self-care. And I would add to that the importance of sleep. I've been hearing a lot of people talking about that they're not really sleeping well these days. And I think that's a lot of the anxiety and stress, but how important it is to do the sleep piece, because that really impacts our mental health and how we're feeling. So that's really important. And then there's one thing that you did mention that we've also been talking a lot about, and I think in connection to our kids as well, which is the news consumption. We started off talking about how we, limit how much we're letting our kids watch the news. But I've also talked to parents who are spending a lot of time either reading news or watching news, and they know it's impacting them. And so I think that's really important to our mental health as well, and our well-being, which is just taking good care of ourselves and limiting how much of the news that we're consuming every day. So great points there on all these things that folks ought to be doing. Okay, so we've got some other, I think we've got one more question we wanted to ask you, and then we've got some other questions that folks are asking that we want to share with you as well. Okay, this is a big one, because we're hearing lots of, I had a parent that I talked to the other day, and she goes, okay, so the reality is I could put Frozen 2 on over and over again on replay, and I would get a lot done. So really, from your perspective, in your role with your medical expertise, like really how much screen time is okay and reasonable given the current situation, and how much is probably too much?
That's there's so much conflicting information out there, that kids should only be using their devices for school and only less than 1 hour of screen time per day, or that, how much ever screen time is fine. Let them do things that are going to focus on mindfulness or doing other things on the screen. There's so much great technology out there. I'd really say that there's not a one size fits all for families. And so to be able to say in this unpredictable and chaotic time, I think going back to the fact that we need to give ourselves grace to realize that the routines, as much as we try to keep regular routines, they're not the same right now. A couple of things that you may want to look for, though, is if the screen is on all the time, oftentimes kids are then not connected to other humans, not connected to us, and maybe not getting some physical activity with their body. And oftentimes when kids are on screens too much, we may notice that they're not paying attention as well as they usually would. They're not able to focus as well. And so I think just knowing that there is not an exact amount that I'm going to say that there's too much or too little, but knowing that as we navigate through this time, that's going to look a little bit different for every family. But just to really evaluate, how is your child responding to screen time? Does this feel like too much or too little in the context of our family? And what are some other alternatives to screen time? Could we start pulling out some board games? Could we start to do things together that are a little bit more creative or fun, or do some artwork? Looking for some good alternatives that can also help keep kids occupied and busy in a good way.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we've got some other great questions that have come through from some of our participants that I wanted to share with you. A couple of them having to do with teens that I'll start with. So two things. One is, how do you address children or teenagers that are witnessing their friends or peers not taking the social distancing as seriously as they should, or that their they're not, and neither are their families? What do you say to something like that?
That's really hard. And I think really going back to the evidence. I think as a physician, I always start to go back to what are facts, what do we know as objective evidence, and where are we? Having some of our teens, we can have some real honest conversations with what's happening. We are at a unique opportunity right now that if we can really engage well in social distancing, in good hand hygiene, and we can really do this well, we have this opportunity to avoid being where New York and Seattle have been. And that window of opportunity is not going to last forever. We really have these several weeks in which we really have a chance of making a big difference. And when we think about perspective taking, for instance, perspective taking is based on life experience, right? We can have, as we get older, we have a little bit more perspective. For an adolescent, for a teenager, oftentimes their perspective is that not having a day with their friends can feel really, really hard. And that can be incredibly disappointing. And so they may not have that ability to be able to step back and to take that perspective about why this is so important and what this really means. And so as much as we try to educate our kids and to try to tell them the importance of this is how we're practicing, this is a struggle for us as well, modeling that for them, but also taking the time to acknowledge their disappointment, that they're not out with their friends when other people are sometimes out there and not taking this quite so seriously.
Okay. And there was a similar question to that, but I feel like you kind of touched on it, which is, also if you've got a teen, let's say, who lives with their own mental illness, so living already, it's sort of already vulnerable in that respect, and dealing with the situation where they refuse to comply with stay-at-home restrictions. Any thoughts on that?
You know, I think we just do the best we can. We are all in this together. We're in this as a community, and we each just try to make the best choices that we can every day and try to do the best we can.
So we've been talking about teens for a while. Now I have a couple of questions that are more for the younger kids. So one is, would you suggest are the best ways to explain the current situation to some of our younger kids, so pre-K age kids? Thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And as a mom of a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, you know, we've had some hard conversations at home, just in terms of even realizing that kids are very intuitive. They pick up on what's going on around them. And oftentimes the way that they understand and process information is so different than oftentimes we even realize. So I think the first step is just kind of checking in to see, hey, what do you think is going on? You know, I had a conversation with my 5-year-old about corona. He's like, I have to take a shower so I don't get coronavirus. And so we had to step back and talk about, so what is coronavirus and what happens and what are you worried about? And, you know, when we took that time to just start talking about what was on his mind, kind of learned that he was worried about people getting coronavirus and not being here and dying. And so we had a conversation about that. And every time we have these hard conversations with kids, I think it's always important to be able to remind them that they are loved and they are safe and we are here with them right now. It's the two things that I say to my kids every night. You are loved and safe. And if we can create that space for them every single day, especially when they're young, the impact that that has for the rest of their life is huge. It's monumental. And then the other part is just empowering them that even at 4 or 5, they can do things to help. They can wash their hands. We can wash their hands for 20 seconds and sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. We can use a Kleenex and make sure that we're not shaking hands. You know, now we're not really in public as much, but, you know, starting to think about that as we were just starting with all of this. Reminding them that there are things that they can do. You know, hand hygiene and social distancing, giving them things that they can start to feel empowered.
Thank you. That's great. So here's another one and you have a 5-year-old, so you may have some particular thoughts on this. So someone shared that I have a daughter who's 5 years old, and it's difficult for her to express her emotions. So I know that one of the things that they talk about for that age is drawing, but she was wondering if you had any other suggestions other than verbal or drawing expressions of emotions, any other ways that might be good for children to be able to express their emotions?
You know, kids express their emotions in so many different ways. Drawing is a great one. Another is play. You know, oftentimes at that age, if you just sit and play a game, trying to engage in creative and imaginative play, that's oftentimes how they'll be able to express their emotions a lot more. Other times, you know, some kids just have a lot of energy. And so some of how they express their emotions is getting outside and moving their body. You know, there's so many ways to express emotions, but I think the most important thing is just checking in, being in touch, and realizing that as a parent, you know your child the best. If something doesn't seem quite right, try to figure out a little bit more and delve a little deeper into what's going on.
Okay, great. And then we sort of touched upon this earlier, but I think it might, because I think there's a lot around the screen time question, so I think it bears sort of touching upon this a little bit more. Someone just asked, would you provide some suggestions regarding the potential benefits of reconsidering some of family constraints on age-appropriate screen time, especially for mid to older teens' ability to connect with their classmates and peers? And I thought it was interesting because somebody else earlier mentioned encouraging teens to use study groups as a way to connect, then also that they're staying engaged with their studies. So thoughts on that in particular. I think this is really referencing those older teens, that how that might actually be beneficial during this time.
Sure. And, I would say that it's a little bit of a different world right now. That is the medium by which we can remain socially engaged. It's screen and technology. And so if we're using screen and technology in an effort to be socially engaged and to continue with education, that's okay. Those are things that are helpful. If we're using screens all the time based to do online computer games and social media all the time, those kinds of things may not be things that are as enriching. And so looking not just at the amount of screen time, but what that screen time is being used for can help provide some guidance.
Great. And then we've got one more question about mindfulness, because you did mention it earlier. Thoughts on how to teach mindfulness to kids? What's one of the best ways to actually teach that? And is it an important tool for kids to learn?
I think it's an incredibly important tool for kids to learn. And I'll share that I started doing some mindfulness and deep breathing when my oldest was probably about 2.5 or 3. Just even in terms of, we were talking about apps a little bit earlier. Headspace has apps for kids that actually it goes all the way down to 3 to 5. And so it's really never too young in a sense of trying to teach them about deep breathing and starting to be able to be mindful. Mindfulness is really this ability to be present in the moment and to be present in a non-judgmental manner, just to be able to and it helps us to be able to be in check with our own emotions. There's a number of different ways in which we can teach mindfulness, and there's a number of different mindfulness exercises. I think just starting with some exercises related to deep breathing can be a really great place to start. You had mentioned square breathing or triangle breathing. That can be a really great way just in terms of it helping us to be present. Some things that I like with younger kids is taking a walk and using spidey senses. And so if you take a walk and start to look at, what do you hear? What do you notice with your eyes? What do you feel? What does the ground feel like on your feet? It's that ability of just engaging all of our senses to be present in our environment. So you can incorporate mindfulness in just about anything. You can incorporate mindful eating, in which it's just taking one bite at a time and really noticing about what those flavors feel like in our mouth and, what the texture feels like. And so there's so many ways. It's really just going back to how can we be present in this moment.
That's excellent. I love that. That was a great way to describe that. And I did not realize that some of those apps actually had meditations and options for young kids. So that's great to know that. Okay, so want to share a couple of things that folks were sharing with us, which I thought were interesting. Somebody shared a podcast called Peace Out Podcast. And so there's a really cute episode called Come Fly With Me that she uses to calm herself before she goes to bed. So great way to use technology. And then someone mentioned that some of the online games are socially engaging for older kids. I have students connecting with friends across the country, especially those that cannot drive. So another good perspective. We have one more question, and then I think we're going to be getting close to the end of our hour with you. But this parent asked about their own child who was in advanced classes. And the parent feels as though even when they try to give them hard and challenging work, it's not as challenging to the child because he finishes up quickly and just gets bored and irritated. Any advice on that?
It's a tough time in terms of navigating through educational environment when things feel so different. So it might be that this child is responding to the fact that this isn't what it looks like or feels like in school, and being at home feels very different in that regard. So that may be part of what's happening. And, I'd always go back to, we've got to just give ourselves grace that this is uncharted territory, that this doesn't feel the same for kids. It doesn't feel the same for us. If things don't go exactly as planned for all of the educational goals, that's okay. That's okay. I think it's just trying to take the next best step and trying to do the best we can in terms of educational goals in a challenging environment.
I love what you keep reminding us. I think you've said it probably 3 or 4 times in this conversation, which is that reminder that this isn't forever. I don't remember, you haven't exactly saying it like that, but essentially this is a time for us, but we're not going to get stuck is what I kept hearing really. It's not like we're stuck in this time, that this too shall pass and we'll be in a different place. Because I think, especially as you mentioned, like, we're in about week 3 or whatever, many of us of doing this, and it can start to feel that way, as though we're going to be stuck in this place. And so I thought that was such a great reminder to us all, that in this really challenging time, what I keep hearing you say is extending grace to yourself and to your family and to the people in your lives. And then really recognizing that this is a moment in time and we're learning some unique skills, new things potentially that we've not known before, that we've not experienced before, but we're learning some things to get us through this time, but we will get to the other side. So do you have any other particular comments or anything that you would like to share with our participants this evening that listened in? I think when you've got over, 100 folks that jumped on, that it was clearly because this is a topic that we've, again, been hearing lots of folks talk about. I think there's a lot of concern about the long-term mental health impact on our kids of all of this. And so I thought that it might be good for us to end with that. If you might share with us some of your thoughts on all this. This is what you do. This is part of your work every day, is dealing with the mental health of kids. And so for those of us that are concerned about the long-term impact, thoughts on that and thoughts on some of the things that we can and should be doing during this time to ensure that that we all end up on the other side of this, in the best possible place with our mental health and in regards to our kids' mental health as well.
Kids are resilient and we are resilient. And I think remembering that is going to be really important in terms of getting through this challenging time. I think it's an opportunity in which we can really look at, how do I want to look at my relationship goals with my kids? How do I want to look back at this time? And, with everybody sort of together and in this environment that we're not really used to, hopefully we can step back and look at it as that this was hard, and this was fun. And this was a time where I was able to connect with my kids and our family, and we grew closer together. And part of how we grow closer together is that we realize that we can make it through hard things together. So even though, as we're talking about this social distancing or physical distancing, which I love that you reframed it that way, because it is so important for us to be socially connected with one another, is, we want to look at this as a way of taking care of ourselves, taking care of one another, remembering we can do hard things and that we are in this together as a community. One of the best things about Austin, I think, is that it is such an amazing, dynamic community in which people are so conscious of what is happening in the world around them and where we really take care of one another. And we see that in so many different ways, whether it's at the hospital this week, I can't tell you the number of times that people delivered food and that we're taking care of healthcare workers, and the number of times that people stop just to say something positive to one another, to really be able to practice gratitude, not just for what we're thankful for in our lives, but what are we thankful for in other people and other people around us that make everything work. So if we can, start to just acknowledge the feelings that we're feeling, practice gratitude, and remember that we're going to make it through this.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Koli. We are incredibly grateful for you, for your time today, because we know before we came on, you shared with us that this happens to be your week where you've been on service. And so it meant that you'd had a really long day already, and you came home and practiced all your decontamination to be ready to sit down in your home. And we so appreciate you spending this hour with us. I know we've gotten some messages already from folks talking about how beneficial it was. And so we thank you for your time, and we thank you for all the work that you do every single day, taking care of the children in our community and caring for their mental health, and for the great tips and ideas that you gave us this evening. So we're grateful for you, and we thank you for that. And we thank you for all of the work that you do in the community. We appreciate you being with us. Just a reminder, folks, before we finish up this webinar, that we will be back next week with more Mind Matters at Home. Next week, we're going to actually be doing a daytime session in hopes that we thought some of you remote working parents might like to join us for an hour in which we will talk about some great strategies and practices for navigating the current situation. So we hope that you'll join us again. And once again, Dr. Koli, thank you so much. A big thanks to Christina for all her help with the technology as well. All of you, thank you for joining us this evening. Stay healthy, be well. We hope to see you again next week, and then the following week when we have Ann Grady join us for Mind Matters at Home. Thanks so much. Good night.
Thank you so much.